Hi, I'm Lisa Laronde, the first woman president at RSJ International and the host of this new podcast called the Powerhouse Project. From breaking barriers to shaping industries, the Powerhouse Project highlights diverse voices and perspectives. Today we have Maggie Casey, who is a civil litigator focusing on employment, human rights, and labor law. Welcome to the Powerhouse Project, Maggie. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, Lisa. I jumped in. I was so excited. Thank you for having me on. As you introduced, I'm a lawyer at a firm called Mann Lawyers in Ottawa, Ontario. So we are a mid-sized firm that's based. We have an office here in Ottawa and then in a small town outside of Ottawa called Perth. And we do all types of law. I, as you said, am a civil litigator. And so I do general civil litigation. So that's commercial work. We do some construction. We do anytime, a company suing another company, we do a lot of that work. And then on top of that, I do employment law and a little bit of labor law as well. So that's primarily our firm does employee and employer side work, but my favorite is the employee side work. And I'm just getting started. So I'm a brand new lawyer. This is my first year out of law school. So I'm, new to the corporate world and getting a sense of it all and taking it all in. It's been quite the journey so far.
That's awesome. So you've lived in quite a few countries. How do you think that those experiences shaped either who you are today or just some of the experiences that you've had?
Like you mentioned, I grew up overseas. And so we lived in Africa for a little bit. My parents were in Africa. We lived in Belgium. And then I spent most of my childhood primarily in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia and in Oman, and then in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia and Indonesia. And so that's been, I think, a really big part of who I am. And I think resiliency is the word that would come to mind when I think about the way that I grew up. Obviously, it was an immense privilege to get to experience all of these different cultures and places, but also as a child, when you think about it now as an adult, the getting to travel and do all that sort of stuff is just really seems like a privilege. But when you're a kid, you don't really realize it the same way. And a lot of it is the difficulty of moving schools. If you're not moving, your friends are moving. It's a very transient experience. You're not with your grandparents. You're not with your family. You're far away. And so I think what I learned and what has helped me, particularly in the law, is the resiliency of knowing that you can be picked up and transported and you can have the experience of not knowing what is going on for the first, couple of months while you adjust to a new school and also to a new culture, and having the confidence that you will figure it out. And so that's something that has been incredibly valuable to me in my experience as a lawyer, is that when you start your career and you feel like you don't know what's going on, other people are underestimating you too. There's a sense that, okay, like I have been here before. I have not known what is happening before. I have been the new person and I have made it work. And it gives you a sense of like confidence in your abilities to make any situation work and not to panic in those kind of initial feelings of chaos when you're like, I am out of my element and I do not know what is going on. And I can have the self, reflection to be like that. You were also out of your element in grade 1, 5, 8, 10 when you moved, all of those experiences. So that's been a big part for me. And that I think has been the biggest like value added in terms of my experience. And then of course, being able to connect with people from different cultures and being able to find quickly moments where you can talk about people who have different experiences than yourself has been really helpful as well.
And I think that's really interesting. I think, just experiencing different cultures just gives us a different perspective that we would never have had. So was language barrier ever an issue for you, or did most of the places that you were in, it was English?
So I was always in school in English, but yes, definitely language was a huge part. So Malaysia in particular, so that's where I did high school. That was pretty easy because the English is their second language. So Bahasa is their first language and then English. So that wasn't ever too difficult. But I mean, it's crazy to think like I'm still pretty young, but the internet has changed the game so much that even like now when I go back to Malaysia, when I travel now, the language is almost not an issue because you have your phones, which have data, which translate things on the spot for you. But even like when I was in high school, I had a cell phone, but we didn't have like data the way that we had now. Like you didn't have internet the same way. So definitely then. And in other places where we lived, it was much more of an issue. I mean, we lived in Saudi, right? So that's like a completely different cultural experience. I mean, talk about the female experience. I remember I was like shocked when I realized that like women like could drive. Like when I remember realizing that my mom knew how to drive, because in Saudi she didn't drive. And then we would come back in Canada in the summer. And I guess whatever age I was, I connected. I was like, what is going on? Like, why are you driving? Like, she's like, of course I can drive. And I was like, well, I just watched you not drive for a whole year. Like, what are you talking about?
That's
And
hysterical.
yeah, being like, oh yeah, like you can, I thought you, like those different experiences. So definitely language, but I think too, like culture, like just the people live so differently in other places than they do in Canada.
Now, do you think that that is partially what inspired you to pursue a career, especially with the human rights that you're doing?
Yeah, I think 100%. And when lots of people go into law, and I think when you talk to lawyers, the common thread that they will say of why they wanted to do it and what was most rewarding was wanting to help people. And like
Yeah.
that is no different for me. But I think what really inspired me, because you can help people in a lot of ways. Your daughter is a teacher, my parents are teachers. That is like one of the most incredible things that you can do to help people. But when I thought about what really inspired me, was like learning about like the systems of like oppression and privilege. And
Yeah.
that was really on a bigger scale what fascinated me. And I think that came from living overseas and seeing the ways that the laws drastically impact culture. So
Yeah.
yes, culture is there, but it also is drastically impacted by the way that laws happen. And it goes back and forth. And that kind of connection was incredibly interesting. And I was able to see that by being, if you take somewhere like Saudi Arabia, which is had, a lot of really strict laws about what you could and couldn't do,
Yeah.
particularly for women at the time. I was there in the early 2000s, versus Oman, which is a Middle Eastern country, same Arabic culture, but because the laws were different, the experience of living there was also so drastically different. And it was a lot more, women drove. You didn't have to wear, if you weren't Muslim, the like the headdresses and the abayas, and it allowed for like a much more diverse like cultural experience. And that was primarily because of law. It wasn't because they weren't Arabic or they weren't from a different region. All of those things stayed the same. And that really interested me in the way that how does like a society, the importance of a legal system and the way that impacts a society, and then wanting to understand it. I think my pull to law was wanting to understand the way that the law like has oppression and privilege, and how do people navigate it? Like it's so complicated. Like how do you fight for your
Yeah.
rights or fight for other people's rights within the legal system?
And I think it's really interesting. I know just being in obviously a male dominated industry in construction. And one of the things that we look at is, how do we find our voice, or how do we unite our voices so that we can actually fight for just some common, so maybe decency is the wrong word, but just some common ground so that we're on equal footing. It's surprising to me that in 2024, I mean, we still have to have these conversations. I was at
Mm-hmm.
a session that they were saying there was no in Ontario, there were no human rights complaints. There were no human rights complaints in construction in Ontario, which I found that really hard to believe. So that means that there's something that doesn't allow us to actually go through the process. There was one in Alberta and none in Ontario. So can you just speak to why, or just why you think that we would not have any complaints?
100%. I mean, that's a huge part about the law, is to get there and to like, register it or bring your complaint forth. There's such massive like barriers to like justice. And so particularly when you think about our legal system, so if we take Ontario, there's the criminal system. So in that case, if you're charged with a crime, you have to, it's not the victim necessarily that's like paying for the government to like persecute, let's say, the murderer, like that's happening. That's a publicly funded system that has its own problems too. But in our system, like a human rights system, it's civil. So the way that those complaints are coming, if we're talking about the legal system, so if we're talking about like, let's say under the Ontario Human Rights Code, that has to be funded by the victim to bring that like complaint. There's no public like system. We don't have public defenders in that sense. It's all private. It's all happening within the civil system that, I operate in. And so, yeah, like and then what happens is what you're saying is people equate the fact that there aren't cases being brought forward with the fact that those issues aren't happening. And that
Exactly.
is that is like the failure of like the legal system in terms of justice, in that is where you lose it, and where there's so many, in order to even get in front of and engage in the legal system requires a certain amount of like privilege, money, sophistication. Like that's a huge part that's hard to talk about. But the level of sophistication, do you have time to navigate it? Or are you working 15-hour days with 3 kids that you have to, fund? And so that's a big part. And then like culture. So potentially in the construction industry, I don't know what you find, but is there kind of like, you shouldn't really be completely almost ratting out your other, like your coworkers or your own, you're turning on your own almost I wonder if that's part of it too.
Well, it is interesting that I'm starting. We were just having much more conversations about we have to keep talking about it, because what happens is exactly what you're saying. If we don't talk about it, people think it doesn't exist, and that's really, I think, what we need to start changing this narrative, that it does exist, that there is a lot of harassment and discrimination in the workplace, and the only way that I think that we're going to actually change how it works is to talk about it and to tell our stories. So, do you know that in Canada we've made significant strides in trying to protect human rights? Do you believe that there's still work to be done to address the systemic
Yeah,
inequities?
absolutely. And I think kind of building off what you were saying earlier, one of the big things too is in the legal system. So one of what I have noticed is that we actually see like a lot of human rights cases like come before us, but they settle. And so that means that they're not getting like
Oh,
recorded. And so that's something that's really interesting. And I think is both a positive because it means that things aren't being litigated or being dragged through the court
yeah,
system, which is like, to be honest, as somebody who sees it every day, like kind of a nightmare for the victims.
yeah,
But what you lose then is the reporting system of people. Then you get victims then get some sort of money and compensation, which is good, and they settle, which is good. And as a lawyer, that's 99% of the time I'm trying to get a settlement for my clients. It's not usually good, but it doesn't help change like the system. And that's been one of the hardest things that I've found, is because like you said, it's not getting reported on. People aren't talking about it. Most settlements are you have to sign like a confidentiality and a non-disparagement. So it silences the victim.
yeah,
So it's like an individual victory, but not a collective victory. And that is, I think, a big part of when we look at human rights is how do we, yes, our legal system, it works to help people get some money. And oftentimes that is going to be better than going through the legal system. But we still need to do a lot more outside of the legal system, like something like this podcast or within the workplace connecting people, because the experience is that everybody's having these things and they feel
yeah,
isolated and that it's a little bit their fault and all of those things, even if they technically get a good settlement. And what I didn't realize is just how common it is, right? Like every day our phone rings with these types of cases and it's still happening so commonly, but because of the way the legal system works, it's not getting like reported on. But it absolutely is there, and there's absolutely a lot of work to be done. Employers are getting, so if we talk about it in the employment
yeah,
space of human rights, because that's, my particular area. I mean, the criminal system, there's tons of things that do it, but in my area, employers are getting better and people are more conscious of it. It's a lot more in the news. People take harassment. Like if an employee says that they have been harassed, that tends to be taken more seriously, but it's still happening like a lot. And I think that's part of the problem too.
And I know that we found what started to happen was we would do this complaint process, and that would be, you go forward, they do the investigation,
Yeah.
and then at the end of the day they can't prove anything, and so to me it was just a failed process. And I know, and I agree with you. I think we need our laws in place, and I agree. I think it's nice that you can settle, but we really need to start talking that if we are settling and we have our individual wins, we're not doing this collective win as a group. And I think that that's really what needs to change. Or, things like you're saying, maybe get on, podcasts or get it newsworthy so that we can actually get the message out there that this continually exists.
And one of the big things too, if you think about like tangible changes, so I think that's a lot of I think, but like what can we do kind of incrementally? I think one of the things would
Yeah,
be not if you're going to have like a human rights settlement, potentially talking about maybe you're not allowed to have like confidentiality clauses, right? Maybe it's like, yes, you can pay people out so that it doesn't litigate and it stays, but really being careful about the way that we're allowed to just have people sign away their rights to ever speak about it ever again. I think that's something that really hurts the development of human rights in Canada, that you can't expect people to not take the money if it's there,
yeah,
but then maybe we recognize that this isn't something that we should be, for the greater good of like our society and the development of human rights, like muzzling basically through that process. So that's something that I think about, advocating about and working on, of reducing the use of these like huge settlement clauses. I mean, that has a lot of other implications too, but I think that's something as well, because when you restrict people's right to speak about it, it really is fundamental to both their dignity and our ability to affect change on a greater scale.
I 100% agree with you. So for workplace discrimination and harassment that continues to be a significant issue, do you feel that the labor law and the anti-discrimination laws are working together? Or do you feel like that's creating a fair and inclusive workplace?
Yeah, and so I mean, I think in the legal sphere too, it's like so labor law is typically like union based work, so that is going to have its own set of laws in the way that a union like runs a grievance and that process. When I talk about employment law, we have the two kind of big pieces of legislation is the Employment Standards Acts and then the Ontario Human Rights Code. And the reason why I picked this area of law is fundamentally they are rights giving pieces of legislation. So the Employment Standards Act says like no matter what contract you sign, like you cannot sign a contract that says you're going to get paid $2 an hour, right? We're like that. No, it has to be 16, whatever minimum wage is now. That's what it has to be. And if you sign a contract, it's invalid. And so these actually are really powerful pieces of legislation. And it's easy to be critical. And I find that, I'm still young. I'm still like want to change the system and like make it better. And like I'm fresh to see all the problems. But I think fundamentally that's why I picked this area of law, because I was proud of the legislation that we actually do have in Canada and in Ontario about this. And it is fundamentally, we are continuing in every amendment that we work on, we're continuing to give more and more rights. There's bills, it hasn't been passed yet, but there's bills being read about you have to disclose pay, right? That's a big one. I think for women in particular, if you don't know what the salary range is, women will statistically underestimate themselves 9 times out of 10. And I made that up. So don't quote me on that particular statistic. That I just realized, it's like, I don't actually have the study that backs that up, but it's well known, right? That women will underestimate themselves. And so things like that, like employers have to put the salary ranges up on it. They have to give more information so you're not wasting all these times applying for jobs that are below what you want. And so those types of laws do help to create a better system, and they do work, with the Ontario Human Rights Code. And so, for example, you're allowed to be fired for pretty much any reason in Ontario. Like your boss can fire you for whatever reason. What they have to do is give you your entitlements upon being fired, right? So if they fire you because they, don't like that you wore a blue shirt, then that's fine, but they have to give you your entitlements. But then the Ontario Human Rights Code comes in and says, all right, wearing a blue shirt is not a protected grounds, but you can't fire everybody because they're a woman, or you can't fire anybody because they took, Ramadan off. You can't fire anybody. You can't fire for these protected reasons. And so that's how those two pieces of legislation work together to create our environment and our legal system. And it helps. It helps. I think it's not perfect, but we do have some pretty strong protections in place, and some of the best in the country, in particular in Ontario. We have a strong legal framework.
So now, as a young woman in a male-dominated industry, similar to, it's interesting. The more women that I speak to, I thought construction was this predominantly male-dominated industry, but now I've talked to women in healthcare, and they're saying the same thing. I've talked to women in entertainment; they're saying the same thing. And so I'm assuming that the legal profession is primarily male-dominated. So what challenges have you faced? I know your journey has been a little short, but what challenges have you faced in becoming a lawyer, and how did you overcome them?
So, I mean, I think that is one of like the biggest shockers that like I have experienced. I mean, I'm not gonna like pretend like, through most of university, I went to Queen's University. I studied, in liberal arts. It was predominantly female. Law school is now predominantly female. And not only is the actual numbers predominantly female, the people who are like massively successful in law school and in undergrad are women. Like we are incredible students. We do incredible at the university sphere. And so I have always been engaged in these issues of gender equity, and in particular, the experience of like women and women of different intersectionalities. But it was, and I'll admit it, and this has been the biggest learning curve, like a largely like theoretical like exercise. And I wonder, women of different generations, I think it might even be the opposite, where it's been like the lived experience has always been there, but the actual like theory of like feminism and stuff is something we've really dug into recently. I know that sometimes it's almost like flipped, whereas I felt like I had all this theory about what oppression and privilege was, but my lived experience was pretty minimal in school. And then I started, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's real. What? And I don't even think I realized how much I thought that it was theoretical,
Yeah.
and how much the experience is so different than being in school. It really is. And so it's, and listen, my firm, like the majority of the partners at my firm are women. So it's not that it isn't there, or that it's, particular to my firm or my place, but when you're in a client-centered industry, when I'm primarily serving people and I'm in litigation, so it's people being sued or suing somebody else. So they are unhappy,
Yeah.
stressed, and scared.
Yeah.
And so you start to see all of these biases come out of people because they're in their kind of worst case scenario. And so things like, well, we don't really want you because we want somebody that's assertive. We don't really want a woman because we're worried that other people won't take you seriously. Like that's a big one. And people saying, well, judges are mainly male. So we're we don't really care about it being a woman, but we're worried that if you're a woman and the judge doesn't take you seriously, then that's going to hurt our case.
Right.
And like clients say that like to your face, like, and that's hard, right? I think because
Yeah.
you're like, you're kind of, it's like the client's kind of always right. Like you're supposed to help them. Part of it's
Yeah.
age. They're underestimating you because you're young.
Yeah.
But the other part is like they think being young and a woman is worse than being like young and a man. Like the way that my younger male peers are being treated is they have a little bit of the same kind of ageism and fear of being inexperienced, but it's assuaged by the fact that they are a man and they are then assumed to be assertive. They are assumed to be used to fighting for things. And in litigation, yeah, you're fighting. Like you are literally arguing all day, every day. And that is an inherently unfemale trait. And that I think is something that I've really experienced. And then when you feel that way and you feel underestimated, then your other male lawyers don't necessarily like see it the same way that you do. They're like, oh, it's just like an unhappy client, or oh, you just have to do that. And you're like, but that's like an inherently isolating feeling to be like they don't want me because of something that I have like no control over.
Yeah.
And that is difficult. And I think the experience in the workforce has been very different than I thought it was going to be, and very different than the experience of being in school, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think I had a similar experience when I started with the same thing. And I was said, I was always taken seriously. People always listen to my ideas and my suggestions. And I'm smart. I have business acumen. I'm passionate. And I get into this industry, and everybody was like, first of all, didn't even want to talk to me, wouldn't approach me in any social situation. And it was like all of a sudden, I added zero value and I was irrelevant. And truly, I understand. I actually went through an executive coach because it really threw me off my game, and I really lost my confidence because I was like, why do all these people think that I can't do this job? It was so surprising to me. And that's kind of where I started to say, if I'm feeling that, somebody who's, at the latter part of my career and who I feel like I'm very confident and I speak my mind, if that can actually, take me off my game, I can imagine this next generation coming up and getting exposed to something similar, and just how much that would change. Even do you stay? Do you continue to fight? I was reading now in the Globe and Mail about now women in these C-suites that they're so stressed out that they're saying it's not worth it anymore. It's not worth the fight. So
I totally agree. And I wonder too, Lisa, like when you talk about like imposter syndrome, one thing that I've been thinking like a lot about is like, yes, there's like imposter syndrome, which is, the sense that you feel that you are not worth it and you don't believe like your traits and stuff. But when I listen to you talk, and kind of what I'm feeling is like imposter syndrome, like it's not even that I don't believe it. It's that like other people are telling me that they don't believe me. You're like, it's almost like the idea is like, oh, imposter syndrome is such a big thing. It's like almost like you're almost kind of again being blamed for feeling like insecure in the workplace. It's like, well, you don't believe and see your own success. And you're like, I kind of feel like I wonder for people, minorities. I mean, I think too, like women of color experience it more, people with disabilities. It's like other people telling you, you have sure your own doubts, but then it's kind of like other people also telling you that you're not good in, or they're not sure if you'll be able to do it, like the doubt of other people. And I've found that it's like it's less the imposter syndrome and more like them almost not believing, and then that feeds it. But then you almost kind of feel blamed for feeling like insecure. It's this weird, I don't know if that resonates at all with you, but I've been thinking about that a lot.
It 100% resonates with me. And I think that's why everyone said, did I go through this imposter syndrome? I was like, no, I always knew I could do the job. Like, I'm qualified. I'm confident. But it's exactly, people just don't take you seriously. So it's very, very hard to accomplish things when people are like really setting up barriers to try to make you fail. That's kind of what I felt was happening. I felt like people were like truly against me, speaking up against me. I was always having to prove myself. It's interesting now because now I'm on the other side where I don't feel I have to do that all the time, but I actually just had a situation on last Thursday, and I was like, "It's fucking happening again." It's like I have to prove myself. No, this is not what happened. I mean, I've worked here long enough. You have to, at some point, believe that I know what I'm doing, and you can't be listening to the other white men that just speak up occasionally, and now it turns everything back into this. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you confident? It's mind-boggling to me. And I'm still in 2024. I'm still dealing with it.
100%. And like the labor that takes, right? Like the work and the time that takes. And like, that's what makes you feel like, oh, like, is this worth it? Right? Because you're doing your job that is hard. And I think like that's when you look at like, I mean, kind of in all industries, there's like, you're doing when you're like in the C-suite or you're moving up in the world, like your job is not easy. Like that is like, I think about that as like, my job is like very hard. Like I'm thinking every day, like my little brain, like it's like a little workout for my brain every day, like thinking so hard.
Yeah.
And then you have that too. And then if you're not careful and you don't put up those things, then you internalize that. And then that's when it starts to go. And then you're almost blamed for being like, well, you don't have confidence in yourself. And it's like, it's not me. Like I had it, but you guys made it so hard. And I agree. And it's happening still at your level. And I'm like, I definitely feel, I mean, like being young doesn't like help that. Either. Like, my friends and we were like talking about like getting like Botox or whatever. And I was like, I can't afford Botox. I need my wrinkles. Like nobody will take me seriously until I look weathered. Like I can't do that. Are you kidding me? I was like, I'm like drawing my little wrinkle lines in so I don't have to spend the first 15 minutes trying to like prove that I know what I'm doing.
Yep. And it's funny, even on construction sites, we have the same problem. Some women say they put on a wedding ring, even though they're not married. So that they give this perception that, just the different strategies that you have to use to be taken seriously. And I agree with you. It takes this mental capacity that when you're really, really busy and you have a lot going on, sometimes some days I go, I don't have the mental capacity to be able to strategically deal with this situation that I know I have to deal with strategically, because I don't want to come across as, it's like the scorned woman, or, are you having a bad day, or, are you on your period? It's like
difficult. Like
it's amazing to me. So, but I do hope, and I have all this confidence in the next generation that we can figure out. And I think again, these kinds of forums that we can actually, talk together, that people understand that you're not alone. We all deal with it, and we just have to figure out ways to be able to accomplish that. So we discuss a lot about mentorship and sponsorship. Have you found either in your career developing, whether it's been mentorship or sponsorship?
100%. And I think too, like that is the big difference. And so the way that I still feel like coming into the corporate world has been like jarring, and then I'm like, oh my God, like they really do just trust men way more than they trust a woman. Both opposing counsel, like judges, like clients, I have felt, but I'm like, I can't. And so that has been like truly difficult, I think, for me. But what has been amazing is that at least for me, I have women that I can see that have been successful above me, and that relate to you in a way that even the kindest, most understanding like male coworker or male lawyer like doesn't quite get it the same way of like that. The way that it just feels so weird to like be told to your face, or be kind of, when somebody's like, why don't you just be a little bit softer, like a man's just like, that's just like a word that they said to you. And I'm like, that has years of like oppression like in me. I was like, that just feels like putting a blanket of like all of the times that like the women come before me have been quieted, but I can go down the hall and say that. And then, the senior lawyer that's, now a partner is like, are you kidding me? Like, who is that client? Like, we don't, like, they're like, what are we talking about? What's going on? And they have that. And so that is like truly invaluable. And I think why it's really just so important that we keep women. We don't lose women at that like mid level. I don't know if that happens in construction, but we lose lawyers at that like right around when they start having kids, right at that
Yeah.
like 35 point, the drop off starts to happen. But it means everything to me that you have women to do that mentorship and that leadership, because the oppression is still there and the like misogyny is still baked in our culture. And so you need it. Like that's the part that I've realized is like I truly need the support of the women who have been successful.
Yeah, I agree. And they're calling not the middle managers the broken rung now, because they're saying
Mm.
for construction. We have a great track record of of attracting women into the industry, but then it's exactly as you said. You get to this childbearing years, and there's not we don't have a good mechanism to be able to have women that want to do both. And I actually interviewed Robin Patak, and so it was funny. She's the vice president of sales for Canada for P&G, and she
Mhm.
said, I didn't want, well, I can't remember how she said, but she said, I wanted it all. I just wanted it all. I wanted to have my family, wanted to have my career. I wanted to keep moving up. And she was lucky enough to work 4 days a week. So she had twins. And
Wow.
it just worked for her. Yeah. And I said, you know what, Robin, you got to tell your story a little bit more, because it's important that people understand that we can do it all. And I'm not saying you have to, everybody has to do it all, because some people want to stay home with their kids, and that's perfectly fine. But that means you're doing exactly what you want to do. But other people want to have their kids and have a career, and do it all. And I think we should be able to do that. I also say now, the traditional families have changed. You have same-sex parents, you have blended families.
Yep.
You know, you still don't know who the primary caregiver is anymore. So we need to have benefits set up so that both parties can actually manage both a family as well as a career.
And I think that's a big part too when I look at like our firm is like having men take like kind of
Yeah.
extended periods of time off when I look at that those like childbearing years, because that also like normalizes, the law is like inherently like competitive. So you come in as a junior associate and it's about billing. So it's about the amount of in the private sector. And so if you are it's developing your client base, it's billing, it's all those things. And so you take a year off, then it's like, oh, I'm behind. And then you feel stressed about that. And then you're like, well, maybe I don't even come back because I'm too far behind. But if we have men also taking chunks of time off, whether it's for, mental health leave or it's for like parental leave, different types of things, that helps to normalize that in those like peak young family years, traditionally, that people are kind of in and out. Like, I think that really helps too. And just seeing women who have done it, I think that is just so like great, and such as like somebody who's at the beginning of it, like being like, okay, it is possible, like they did it.
Yeah.
And like it is so cliche, but it really makes you feel like you can do it too. And if you didn't have that, it would feel so difficult. And so I'm so grateful for the generations that have come before me that did not have those role models, did not have, you know president of the companies being women to look to, and to be able to do it anyways. Because it does make such a big difference, and I think it helps to normalize the way that men interact in the spheres too.
And I agree. And my executive leadership team is actually, I think we're 50-50 women and men. And I'll tell you, I love coming. I mean, I've always loved coming into work because I love what I do, but I
Yeah.
really enjoy coming in. It makes a huge, huge difference when you have women at the senior level. And we have a lot of young people that work here that, just starting their family. And it's nice. And I keep saying to one, she has 2 young kids. And I was saying, you need to talk about this. You need to tell people how it works. Also that it's really hectic and it's really frustrating, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
As long as we have this community that we can share stories and exchange, ideas together, I think that's so important.
Yeah, totally normalizing it. Like I even think about, just the other week, the partners kind of came into my office and they had like some news and it was hard and I was just a busy day and I was overwhelmed and I started to just tear up. And it was like the first time in my career that I've like cried at work. And it was like one of our partners is a woman and she kind of came, they were super nice and it was fine. And then she came back later and she's like, I just, not that it's anything, but I just want to say like crying at work is like not anything to like apologize for. She's like, it's not even like a like it's literally nothing. Like it's not even like it's okay. Like we're going to allow it. Like we're not going to think worse of you. She's like, it's truly like nothing. And she's like, I do it all the time. I've done it all the time. Like it's completely fine. And even just those types of like little things that I don't know if a man would know quite how weirdly vulnerable it felt to cry in front of like a more powerful man, like as a young woman crying in front of like a man at work, and to have her just come and like do that tiny little check-in and being like, it's like nobody's even going to think about this like anymore, and it's fine. You're like, that is so important in having that type of female leadership.
I agree, and I think the problem is we consider crying as a sign of weakness, and that's really what I think just needs to change, because it's an emotional response. It doesn't necessarily mean you're weak. It's just affected you in a manner that I think is really important, and I think it's important that we show that we're vulnerable. I mean, we're human after all, and we all make mistakes. I think that's one thing that I've recognized, and we all need help and support to be able to be successful. So, as a woman in law, do you believe that there's certain strengths or perspectives that women bring to the profession?
I mean, absolutely. I think there's so much about like the female, like quote unquote, like typical traits that are like so beneficial to being a lawyer. I mean, I think first and foremost, for me, working in employment, I think it's really helpful to like, you're dealing with inherently people's work is like their dignity, right? Like that is so important to them. And like our employment law, like we have lots of cases written by judges that say like, we have these laws that protect it because we understand that it's not just a mechanism for a job. Like working is like fundamental to like the human spirit and to people's like self-respect and identity. And so working in this area of law that like when somebody gets like fired or they've been let go and they come to me, like it's not just about, all right, like what type of money can we get you? Da, 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 da. It's like, I get that this has been like a deeply jarring like experience that may or may not be affecting the way that you think about yourself. And I mean, as a lawyer, I know that, right? Like your identity is super wrapped up in your job. And so as a woman, I'm able to both connect to that and validate that, while then also being like having the ability to, and now let's like do these things. And if a client needs to have, for example, an emotional moment, I'm not uncomfortable with that. And there's lots of men who are very socially aware that are able to do that. But I think that is one of the skills that I really have. So much of like the business, I mean, the other part too is like so many of our clients now are women too, right? So they are working, they're owning companies, they're in the workforce, they're the C-suite execs, like, and they have all of those things. So being a woman and being able to serve like your own like clientele is also, I think, really helpful, as well as more and more women are involved in like the upper like echelons. I mean, for example, family law has always been like female heavy in terms of lawyers, but I think the more that we see women in like commercial litigation, that's extremely, extremely helpful.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So how can we become allies to advocate for human rights?
I think the most important thing is that if somebody says that you have either hurt them or that you have misspoken or that you have done something that is been problematic, is like really listening. And that's a big part of law, is listening to what your client's problems are. And if they say, well, that's actually not exactly what happened, or we didn't quite get it wrong, you make sure you're hearing what people are telling you, because that allows you to really advocate for them and putting your own ego aside in that process. The best lawyers are the ones who can work like alongside their clients to advocate for them, instead of just trying to be a mouthpiece. And I think that works outside of the law too. So if you have a coworker that says, what you said, that comment, like it made me feel, when you told me to be soft, like that actually made me feel like really small. And that's something as a woman I'm like really sensitive about. I don't like being told to smile. Even these, well, I didn't mean it. Like I just was saying, like, I thought it was a funny, and you're like, don't talk over that. Listen to that and be like, oh, I never thought about it that way. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I won't do it again. And then move on. And those are the skills that you have to use as a lawyer. But I think that just makes you a better advocate in general when you're talking about sensitive things like human rights, and that you might not know because it is so intrinsic to like the experiences of that person. You might not know what it's like to be disabled, to be whatever, all of those things. And so that, if that makes sense, I think that's one of the big things that I use as a lawyer, and I think generally makes us better advocates in the human rights sphere, is really putting aside ego and really listening when somebody has the courage to speak up.
I think that's awesome. So we like to end each episode with, what advice would you give your younger self? So I don't know if you're going to give your 12-year-old self some advice or...
I'm like, could somebody give me advice? I keep thinking about that. I'm like, what if I was 30? What would I be telling me right now? Because I feel very confused. I'm always like, ugh.
Or maybe what advice did you wish somebody would have given you to prepare you, because I do think it's a really huge thing for this generation to come in. Because I agree with you with what you said is, I had all these hopes and dreams for this younger generation coming up, but then you get into this workforce and you're like, holy crap, it's like nothing's changed. So then I'm afraid that we're going to taint that you go like, this is really the way we have to manage ourselves in order to be successful. So, I guess I'm just looking for what advice would you have liked to have heard?
And I think too, maybe the advice that like I hope will hold true. And so maybe like I think what I'm thinking of is like as I come into this workforce is like it's not you. Like if you feel like somebody is like underestimating you, it's not because you are too sensitive or because you are not smart enough or because any of the things that you've done. If you feel like that comment made you feel small and like they don't understand you or that it was because you're a woman, like do not let that, like that is all probably true. And like, you don't need to go and fight every fight because you have to be practical, right? You have to conserve your resources for the ones that are best. But what I am sticking with is like, don't let that like make you be different, like from who you like are and who you want to be and like what you think your skill sets are. And so that's something that I'm hoping also like holds true, that if I keep doing that, that will be successful and like trying to say like it'll actually be a little bit harder than you think. I think that's something that I've realized is that like it'll be a little bit harder than you think. We have a little bit more work to be done in reality than you do, and it's small and it's minutia. Nobody's like telling you can't get pregnant anymore. I mean, really, some people are, but for the most part, but it's littler things.
Yeah.
And don't like let that feel like that's your problem. Like that is still the system that needs to be changed. And you are not like wrong for that. And keep working on it kindly. I mean, I think you be honest and be kind. Like when you're telling somebody that hurt my feelings, do it with a kindness, do it with like a sensitivity to them as well. And don't try to keep that in perspective that it's not you. And I think that's something that would have been maybe nice to have heard, although I don't know if I would have believed it until I was there. But I think that I try to tell myself now, like, it's not you, it's the system. Don't let that make you feel small, and don't let that stop you from doing what you think is the right thing to do and trusting your own instincts. And I really hope that in 10 years, in 20 years, whatever, when I'm partner of my own firm, that is something that I like worked and would be good advice, and that I was glad I told myself.
That would be awesome. So Maggie, your courage, your compassion, and your dedication to standing up for and helping others is remarkable. It inspires me every single day. And it shows that together we can work to create a country where the rights and dignity of all are not only respected, but protected. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Powerhouse Project. And I can't wait to see what you will accomplish. I look forward to celebrating your continued success. And I hope I'm at your partner party.
Yes, you will be there. Thank you, Lisa. I mean, I've looked up to you for so long. And so your success truly feels like our success. And that is like a true blessing. And so I'm so grateful to know you and to get to look up for you and to have you pave the path for us coming up. It's really a blessing.
Awesome. Thank you. I look forward to your generation taking over the world. We need you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maggie. You were awesome. Find more information about our guests and more at thepowerhouse-project.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.